Hello, everyone. I just finished listening to a really great podcast episode, and I just wanted to share it with you folks in case you're interested, maybe checking it out yourselves. I've mentioned this podcast a few times in other videos before. It's the Energy Blueprint podcast. The Energy Blueprint is run by a fellow named Ari Whitten. Ari's a health coach and a personal trainer, and he's been in the health field for many, many years now. I think he's more obsessed with mitochondria than I am, and just his podcast regularly has really, really great guests and just awesome episodes. So highly, highly recommend it. So on April 20th, there's a episode. It was entitled Mythbusting, and the subtitle was something about myth busting about carbs and dietary fat and different things like that. And it was kind of all about, metabolism and different diets and whatnot. And anyways, it was really, really interesting, and I enjoyed it a lot. Ari was talking with this other fellow. I can't remember his name off the top of my head now, but he's a nutritionist, and they've collaborated together over the years. And they were talking about just different questions around, for example, is a low carb diet actually better than a low fat diet for weight loss? And looking at the research literature that's actually exploring that. And the take-home message from that, to my recollection, was that there really is no evidence to suggest that one is better than the other for weight loss or maintaining a healthy body weight. And I thought that was really surprising. And I thought to myself, like, well, wait a minute, like, I've seen this in clinical practice. The folks on a low carb diet seem to do better. And what I really enjoyed was that the questions that I had percolating in my brain as they're talking about the research literature, one of them would kind of bring that up. They say, well, like, devil's advocate to this, or, well, how can you explain what people report, in, their personal experiences or in clinical practice or whatnot. So they were getting into the some of the kind of the nuances around, like, why these are things that might be seen or maybe not seen. So I wrote down a couple of notes here. So let me see here. So yeah, they were talking about kind of low carb versus low fat diet. They were talking about how whether certain dietary types might promote better satiety than others. So one of the so they were saying, well, okay, if say a low carb diet doesn't actually lead to an enhanced metabolism, doesn't actually compared to say a low fat diet doesn't lead to a it isn't superior in that way from, like, a say blood sugar regulation perspective, or for some of the other reasons that folks might purport that a low carb diet would lead to more weight loss, because evidently, according to the literature, they present some compelling literature to show that that's probably not the case, that there is a significant difference, that it's really more about calories in versus calories out, which for years, I've said to my patients, like, at least based on my clinical observation, it really seems to have a lot to do with the type of diet that a person's following, that the calories in, calories out just doesn't seem to play out in practice. People go on a paleo diet, they go on a modified keto diet, they go on a full keto diet, they go on a carnivore diet, and I see weight loss, as being a very common outcome of those diets, sometimes to the point where, if a person doesn't need to lose weight, or they're at a perfect weight, or they're underweight, it's like, okay, do this diet, but we need to antidote it with some carbs, because usually weight loss is an effective or is a fairly common outcome from going on those types of diets. And I assumed, like many folks do, that it had a lot to do with, say, blood sugar regulation and improved satiety and things like that. And they were talking about how, like, this is actually something that's been studied as well. And to my, again, I'm paraphrasing, please listen to the episode if you want sort of more of the specific details. But they were talking about how satiety really has a lot more to do with how whether it's just kind of regular food or it's hyperpalatable food. Hyperpalatable meaning foods that are sort of artificially enhanced to taste really, really good. Like, I don't particularly like Doritos, but something like Doritos is like this most chemically tweaked snack food out there that I could think of, and how it's like that's just hitting on all these different taste receptors and sensations and all of that, and so that people can easily eat an entire bag of Doritos, where it's pretty hard to eat an entire bushel full of broccoli. So satiety has a lot to do with sort of the types of foods that are being eaten, in terms of whether they've sort of been tweaked or not, but then also that variety in the diet has a lot more to do with satiety than the actual, macronutrient makeup of that food, like the protein and fat content and things like that. So again, like things that in clinical practice I've seen, play out as like, oh, this or that diet seems to be associated with this or that outcome. But again, they had some pretty compelling information to suggest that some of the reasons that I, previously thought, as again, many folks do, that why these things were happening, or maybe not actually why they're happening. Listening to the episode, doesn't really change what, at least I don't think it's going to change what I recommend in practice for my patients, but just my understanding around, why these things might be making a difference for folks it has changed. So again, if you're interested, it's a good episode to listen to. They also talked about kind of myth busting around folks having the idea that like, oh, if I've done like a lot of dieting or kind of yo-yo dieting, it could ruin your metabolism or ruin their metabolism. They talked about how that there is also evidence to suggest that is also not true. And then one of the things they talked about, which I had not heard about previously, and I'm kind of surprised I haven't, because again, I listened to web podcasts and webinars and do a lot of continuing education around these types of topics, amongst other things. They were talking about something called energy flux, which I was quite intrigued by, and I'm not sure if I can do it justice here, but talking about how there's a significant difference, and evidently the researchers have not figured out exactly why this is the case, but it has there's a significant difference in terms of a person who, say, eating say they're eating enough, say they need a certain number of calories to, like, let's say they need 2,000 calories to meet their day-to-day energy needs. They say, well, I want to lose some weight, so I'm going to, just say eat 1,500 calories instead. So I'm going to have a 500 calorie a day deficit and, see how that goes. Versus a person who say needs 2,000 calories a day for their basic energy needs, but they decide that they're going to do 1,000 calories a day's worth of exercise, and then they wind up eating 2,500 calories a day. So in other words, they need 2,000, but they're burning an extra 1,000. So they need 3,000 technically, but they're only eating 2,500. So both of these individuals are in a 500 calorie a day deficit. And what they were talking about is how there are shifts in our hormones and other elements of our metabolism, or other elements of our physiology, that are more advantageous to the person who's doing the exercise with the energy deficit versus the person who's not doing the extra activity person who's doing the extra exercise with the calorie deficit versus the person who's not doing the extra exercise with the calorie deficit. And they were talking about sort of some of the features that impact a person's metabolism in that way. And so this was really eye-opening for me, because on my podcast, on one of my podcasts, the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast, I had an interview once, and we were talking, a couple of interviews actually, where they were talking about how there are some folks where it seems like what they need to do is, get some exercise into the mix if they're not doing that already, but actually eat more. And that was interesting to me, because what they were also saying, if memory serves, is that if, say, there was a person who needs 2,000 calories a day for their to meet their energy demands, and let's say they're only eating, I don't know, say 1,800 calories, and they're doing say 300 calories of extra activity. So they're ultimately kind of needing 2,300 in total, but they're only eating 1,800, but they're eating below that 2,000 calories a day that they need for their basic metabolic needs. That's actually going to significantly curtail their metabolism, I think to the tune of about 15%, if memory serves. And so in that case, that person, would they start eating an extra, say, 200 calories a day, then they would actually have better according to my understanding of this energy flux concept, they would actually have better outcomes in terms of losing weight if they were eating 200 calories more, even though their calorie deficit in this case would only be, say, 300 calories per day instead of the 500 from previously. So this really helped my brain to kind of consolidate this otherwise would seem like more of a paradox. So anyways, I hope I didn't throw out too many numbers there to make it too jumbled, but Ari and his guest, they did a really great job explaining this. So again, it was the April 20th episode of the Energy Blueprint podcast, the myth busting episode. And I think it was, I really got a lot out of it. So highly recommend it. So if you listen to it, or you're familiar with these concepts and want to post anything in the comment section below, or you have any questions around this, please feel free to post. And otherwise, I will leave it there for now.